Inside with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, we're going to bring you the latest on the Korean Peninsula. Plus, Trump has blocked the Chinese firm from acquiring a U.S. tech company. Is Trump justified in blocking these private acquisitions in the name of national security? Apple has unveiled the iPhone 10 that comes with facial recognition. Does this high-tech feature really warrant the phone's price tag, and many more?
And then we check that mathematical model against the one that we've stored.
And we begin today's show in the U.S., where President Donald Trump has blocked a deal between a Chinese equity firm and American semiconductor company. It is a rare step for any president to take. The move comes as trade frictions increase between the world's two largest economies, China and the United States, whose leaders are set to meet later this year. Both countries are also working to resolve the nuclear crisis on the Korean Peninsula.
U.S. President Donald Trump has blocked the purchase of a U.S. company by a Chinese firm. It was the fourth time in 27 years for a U.S. president to halt a foreign acquisition on the grounds of national security. All cases are related to China. The White House says the U.S. government uses programmable chips made by the semiconductor company Lattice, and that the purchase endangers U.S. intellectual property and the nation's semiconductor supply chain. In a memo released Wednesday, the president wrote, China Venture Capital Fund Corporation Limited might take action that threatens to impair the national security of the United States. The Wall Street Journal interviewed the president and CEO of Lattice Semiconductor earlier this week, who said, "You're basically saying that the government itself can control IP that they're in charge of. I don't understand that. It has to be that they don't want to do a deal with China." Barack Obama also rejected two Chinese cases during his presidency. In one of them, the Chinese company sued the government for blocking its deal. That case now sets a precedent, says the company's attorney, for other foreign companies to follow if they're similarly rejected.
I suspect in the future, if some companies, foreign companies, feel their rights infringed by the process, they can follow the roadmap laid down by this case.
The move is a test for China-U.S. diplomatic ties. U.S. President Donald Trump was scheduled to visit China later this year. DPRK issues would also top the agenda, given its latest launch of a missile early Friday morning that flew over Japan. The missile landed in the Pacific Ocean some 2,000 kilometers east of Japan's Hokkaido. It comes just a few days after the UN imposed new sanctions, which the DPRK strongly protested. Given the current complex situation, Trump's upcoming visit to China seems ever more crucial.
So how can the U.S. and China resolve both their differences over trade and the DPRK nuclear program? We loop in our panel to find out. In Beijing, we got two guests. Wang Yiwei, director of the Institute of International Affairs with Renmin University. Also in Beijing, Zhao Tong, associate at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Joining us in Washington, D.C., Robert Daly, director of the Kissinger Institute on China and the U.S. at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Gentlemen, I want to welcome the three of you to our program. First thing first, of course, the latest news related to the latest launch of ICBM coming from DPRK and certainly further stirred the pot. Professor Wang, there has been a difference. U.S. further pressure China to take direct action against DPRK. China is saying you cannot just wash your hands and say it has nothing to do with you, the United States. What do you say, Professor?
Well, of course, the target of the North Korea's nuclear test, missile test, always the U.S. airlines and the joint military exercises again and again. It's not about China.
All right, Mr. Daly, the answer from the Chinese guest is very simple. It's not about China. U.S., you better take some attitude and also sit down for some possibility discussion. Mr. Daly.
Right. Well, the progress that Kim Jong-un has made on ICBMs and on nuclear weapons is a failure for Chinese diplomacy as well as American diplomacy and international diplomacy. Neither China nor the U.S. wants to see a nuclear North Korea, and so I think it is in both nations' interests, although for somewhat different reasons, to try to cooperate, if possible, to limit Kim Jong-un's nuclear program. The question now is whether Kim Jong-un has already succeeded. Should our discussion be about how we contain and deter a nuclear North Korea rather than about how we get him to give up his weapons?
Mr. Daly, is that the general attitude that you got from Washington, D.C. when you talk to your colleagues, whether in governments or in think tanks?
Well, the United States policy, the Trump administration's policy, and what we hear coming out of Congress, is still to do everything possible. The goal is to get nuclear weapons out of the hands of the DPRK. But behind that, there is a growing sense that that may not be possible, that we may already have failed. And when I say we, I mean China, as well as the United States. And therefore, the question in the long term is, how do we manage this? How do we prevent Kim Jong-un from using or selling nuclear weapons? And what does it mean for the United States, as well as China and other nations, to live in a more highly proliferated world? And this is a question for China as well, as South Korea, as Japan, as other nations build up their capabilities to counter North Korean weapons, or as they develop their own enhanced capabilities, including nuclear capabilities. What's that going to mean for Beijing?
All right, Mr. Zhao, two questions. Have we, quote unquote, according to the words given by Mr. Daly, failed? Secondly, should we now talk about deter and containment rather than thinking about letting North Korea abandon what they have already probably achieved?
I think the international community has not been successful in preventing North Korea from obtaining a nuclear deterrence capability. And North Korea, in some sense, won this game. So as a result, it gets to dictate some of the results. So North Korea is able to remove some of the options off the table for the international community. So the military option is increasingly risky and is impossible to take. Further sanctions at this point will not be powerful enough to have a direct impact on North Korea's nuclear and missile program. The programs are long past the stage when they can be affected by a reduction of financial resources.
Right. The DPRK nuclear issue is important for two mainly reasons. One is, of course, it's important for the security and peace on the Korean Peninsula and in Northeast Asian region. The other thing it's important, Professor Wang, is because China and the United States once was regarding it as an opportunity to work together, no matter what exactly their end purpose is. At least on this, they need to work together. But will this be an opportunity for them to work together, or this will be further divide them? This has always been a question, and it seems that question is ever approaching us with further tests and with U.S. President Donald Trump's possible visit to China later this year.
Definitely, we should work together because North Korea.
We should. Are we gonna be? That's two different questions, Professor Wang.
We are working together. We are working together in the United Nations, Security Council, passed so many resolutions, but maybe it's not enough because there are so many underground economy that North Korea is easy to get financial, assistance from abroad, to developing the nuclear. So it's very difficult, to be frankly. So, but the purpose of the North Korea nuclear weapons is not, as Dr. Daly said, it's proliferation. Maybe it's for unification by force, and then remove the U.S. Military bases from South Korea. This the U.S. very definitely worry about that.
We would not be able to anticipate 100% as to what exactly is the mentality of the North Korean leader when they are still developing the nuclear weapons. But we do understand, Mr. Daly, things are happening very fast. Even coming Monday, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is going to have the UN General Assembly, as planned earlier, to give a speech. And meanwhile, UN Security Council is going to have a urgent meeting at the call of the United States and Japan later on Friday afternoon, New York time. So there seems to be a lot of things going on all at the same time. Will this help, or will this juncture actually for all to scratch their head and say what to do among all of us?
Well, I think you will see some of that head scratching, and you will probably see more incrementalism, slightly tighter sanctions, more calls. We've already heard from American Secretary of State Rex Tillerson calling again on China to cut off oil shipments to North Korea. I think you will hear more of that. China will not agree to this. So probably more frustrated incrementalism, which will not, as Professor Zhao has already said, change the fundamental equation. So even as we try everything possible to get nuclear weapons out of the hands of the DPRK, one of the things we can be doing together, as I've already suggested, is talk about what management and deterrence might look like going forward, And what will it mean to live in a more highly proliferated world? China has to ask itself how it will respond to South Korean, Japanese, possibly also moves in Indonesia and Taiwan, to build up their own capabilities in a new nuclear or even conventional arms race in Northeast Asia. We need two tracks, looking at the long term, assuming that we can't get nukes out of Kim Jong-un's hands, as well as these discussions in the short term that still tries to find a way to get him to give up his weapons if that is possible.
Mr. Zhao, it seems that China has already asked that question to itself that Mr. Daly mentioned, that how is China going to like that, quote unquote, for the future if this nuclear issue is now being resolved. And China don't like the answer the others give. For example, deployment of that in South Korea. So does China have a choice, Mr. Zhao?
Well, I think for China, non-proliferation has always been an area where U.S. and China share very important common interests. But as North Korea's nuclear crisis worsens, United States feels more direct impact, as Professor Wang just mentioned. As a result, I think the Trump administration is taking an approach of shifting burdens to others. His strategic accountability strategy is basically to forcing his previous partner, China, to take all the prices for containing North Korea single-handedly. And with all the deployment of THAAD missile defense systems, the approach of using coercive power to force your partner to cooperate rather than providing a positive inducement to solicit cooperation, I think that's a very troublesome approach to get cooperation from a partner.
Will China suck it? Professor Wang, should China suck it?
Definitely, we suffer a lot from the many sanctions from that. Now we cut all the nearly financial and trade linkage between China and North Korea. But the oil is the last point. Why China cannot cut the oil supply? Because it's for humanitarian reason, and also it's very easy that North Korea get from Russia if China cut all the oil, and then the China's influence will be immediately diminished, and then even put North Korea back to the corner. So it's not I think in the interest of the United States.
Mr. Daly, you heard your two Chinese colleagues. They do not agree that China should suck all the consequences. And as they say, and China will not suffer all these consequences or suck all these consequences, as the U.S. has proposed and to work with some of the other allies in the region. Mr. Daly, what do you say?
Well, I agree with much of what has been said. I don't think it was ever very realistic to expect, as President Trump mentioned, that China would somehow solve this for the United States or for the world. I think that was never going to succeed. China and the United States have common interests in the North Korean situation, and we have disparate interests. I do not expect China to push sanctions, whether it's exports of oil or whatever it might be, nearly as far as the United States push them, because China's own interests, as has been said, dictate that it not go that route. There are humanitarian concerns, there are ideological concerns, there are strategic concerns of Beijing's, which I think are understood here in Washington. You may not see that reflected in President Trump's tweets, but they are, I think, understood more broadly. That said, nor do I see suffering greatly because of imposition of sanctions. I think that China does suffer a reputational cost from its long-term linkage with North Korea, and from the fact that even though China would like to see a non-nuclear North Korea, in fact, the Kim regime wouldn't be in place, nor would it have nuclear weapons, were it not for Chinese support historically, scientifically, and were it not for the importation of components of missiles even today from Chinese companies. So it's a very complex picture. And Washington has been overly simplistic in its approach. I agree with both Professor Wang and Professor Zhao on that.
Hold it there. I'm not sure what I said. It really coincides with what our colleagues here in Beijing believe, Mr. Zhao.
Indeed, I don't think China provided the nuclear or missile technologies to North Korea. North Korea's technologies, part of that came from Russia when the Soviet Union collapsed, and the Russian scientists were looking for jobs. Many of them were recruited by North Korea. And certainly got some of technologies from Iran, from Pakistan, but China never intentionally provided any of the key technologies to North Korea. And also, China indeed is taking much higher price than what is appreciated in Washington and more broadly in the international community. With China imposing more sanctions on North Korea, starting to strangle the economy, North Korea is starting to threatening China. So China is running the risk of turning North Korea into a nuclear enemy of China. That's a great national security threat for China.
Right. If that picture is not complicated enough, there's another layer. Don't forget that when 15 members of the Security Council just reached an agreement on the sanctions against North Korea a few days ago, the United States, particularly the Trump administration, the White House itself has decided that it is going to ban this transition of the lattice semiconductor to a Chinese buyer. This is quite, I would say, a surprise given the ambience of the time. There seemed to be a united effort at the UN Security Council if President Trump is talking about the deals. So I want to ask our American colleague first, Mr. Daly, how would you interpret that? They say it's about the White House saying, we could let the thing die quietly, but now we want to loudly make a statement that we will make it die. Why?
Well, normally I would say that the linkage you've suggested between North Korea and the decision that the Trump administration has made, and that what's called CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, has made, namely blocking Canyon Bridge's acquisition of Lattice. Normally I would say that you were unjustified in making between the strategic side and the economic side, except of course that President Trump himself made that linkage early in the year. I think that what you see with this latest blockage, the fourth, as your preview piece said, in 27 years, that really is happening on a separate track from the North Korea discussions. And this reflects a long-term, growing, bipartisan American concern, both that Chinese investments and acquisitions in the United States are a growing threat to American national security, and it also reflects a concern with a lack of reciprocity in trade that Chinese corporations are able to do here, things that American corporations aren't able to do in China. So Trump himself has made your suspicion of a linkage legitimate, but I think that in this case we're seeing two separate issues on two separate tracks.
I see. Trump's decision is this time. It's the fourth time a president has barred a private deal on national security ground. Only fourth time. All previous occasions also targeted Chinese companies. George Bush Sr. first used it to block China National Aero Technology Import and Export Corporation from acquiring an aerospace manufacturer from the United States. And then Obama used the authority twice, first in 2012 and then in 2016. And this time it is Donald Trump. And it is not long before he has pledged to have a visit. And Professor Wang, quite mixed messages, I would say.
Even contradicted, actually. The U.S. claims that U.S. welcomes the rise of China. You know, I think that we rise of China, we need this technology. We either get from the commercial way. So it's abounded by the government. Excuse it's national security. But the thing about it that the national security means that the China, in the eyes of the U.S., still potential threat or strategic competitor. So this is it's not the policy that is the welcome of the rise of China.
Mr. Zhao, it is no secret that China and the United States have been using once and again the fact that the economic and trade ties is going to be the very fundamental basis among our two countries when we talk about the future. And of course, together with people-to-people exchanges. But now it seems once and again it's being tested and has been failed. Are we seeing it as the fabric that would really bring the two countries together? Mr. Zhao, briefly.
I think so. There is still potential for mutually beneficial economic relationship. However, as we are seeing the non-proliferation area, I think the U.S. wants to benefit more at the cost of China, even in the economic area where common interests do exist. I think there is a worrisome tendency where the Trump administration is broadening the definition of national security and to apply it to affect many economic sectors. You know, if we look at national security, everything can be interpreted as relating to national security, energy, agriculture, even data, consumer data, everything. So this area where that can be easily affected by politics, and Trump, unfortunately, I think is taking an approach that is encouraging that tendency.
Mr. Daly, you know better than I do. As with the Kissinger Institute, Republicans really value the economic and trade ties between the two countries. and they put a lot of emphasis on that part of the tie. And yet, will this part still be the fabric holding the two countries together, particularly with Chinese overseas investment ever increasing and China's economic clout ever increasing?
I don't think we can answer that. This is in play. This is changing fairly rapidly. With, as Professor Zhao has said, there are a lot of calls, bipartisan in the United States, to expand the definition of national security that is used by this American government committee to block some acquisitions. And I agree with him that the danger here is that national security can be defined to include almost everything. But it is not that the United States, as Professor Wang says, sees this as a strategic competition between the United States and China. It is a strategic competition. China has seen it that way for decades. What's really astounding is that the United States has only blocked 4 acquisitions in 27 years. Compare that to the fact that in China, entire industries are simply closed to American acquisitions, period. China has, which talks about comprehensive national power, 综合实力, has blocked foreign acquisitions in most areas for decades. Now they're seeing a little bit of reciprocal treatment with the United States taking a broader definition, not nearly as broad as China's, and they don't like it. But this is not a radical departure from past practice. Most acquisitions still go through.
Okay.
I think you will see more emphasis on national security in the United States, but nothing close to China's national security approach to economics.
Some accusations coming from Mr. Daly over there. Professor Wang, you need to respond. Your name is being mentioned here.
Okay, the U.S. The national security means that the U.S. always have the preponderance of the generation gaps between technologies between China and the United States. That's unrealistic again, I think. Because it is not China, but any other countries so catch up with the U.S. technology advantage. So I think this is excuse for the military and civilian use or in the future, the IPR. I think it cannot be accepted, not only by China, but other,
Cannot be accepted. Okay, keywords coming from Professor Wang. Mr. Zhao, I want to go to you for that.
I think the trends in the two countries are opposite. China is actually opening up more sectors for foreign investment in recent years, including finance, accounting, telecommunication that used to be closed up to foreign investors. But in the United States, I think there is further limitation on foreign investment. I think that's the major difference here.
Even between U.S. and Europe is more open to China's investment. Acquisition last year in Germany, the KUKA is also very advanced technology, but still Germany not against that.
Technology has become something that is so global that whether you could really block it, it's becoming a very small question mark because it's just impossible. Having said that, though, before we go, we do need to come back to this very big topic of China-U.S. relations. With the upcoming visit of President Trump to China, Mr. Daly, President Trump has decided to have 3 country visits: Japan, South Korea, and China. And of course, Chinese State Councilor Yang Jiechi was in Washington earlier with Rex Tillerson in talks. And we also see the Chinese Foreign Minister, Mr. Wang Yi, going to New York and certainly going to interact with his American colleagues over there. How do we see the two countries preparing for the ambience, the atmosphere before the two heads of state meet?
Well, I think that obviously the more that Xi Jinping and Donald Trump can meet, the better it is for the relationship. So I'm glad that he is going. We expect President Trump will be treated very well in Beijing, a very thick, wide, long red carpet. The Chinese side will I think, try to flatter and please him. At the same time, we know that North Korea and economics, both of which are contentious issues, are going to be high on the list. Steve Bannon also mentioned, this has not been confirmed by the White House, but mentioned that the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer will complete his review of Chinese treatment of American intellectual property under Section 301 of the 74 Trade Act before the trip, which could put these issues in a very stark spotlight. I would regard that as a good thing. The more frank this conversation can be between the leaders of the two nations, the better.
All right. Well, I want to come back to the two Chinese guests very briefly from the two of you because we're running out of time. Mr. Daly is trying to say Well, the Chinese will be very friendly in the reception of President Trump. The U.S. will show its face and its attitude right before the trip. Mr. Zhao, what will be the response from China? How will China see that?
Well, I think the bottom line is both countries are facing common challenges and are trying to defend their common interests. So it's better to talk through our differences rather than imposing pressure on each other.
All right. Professor Wang?
We hope President Trump will not just focus on bilateral relations with China, focus on the competition, make America great, just eyes on of China, focus on the share and common responsibility. Why the United States, not respect, not just because of China, it's because of the irresponsible, quick of the climate change there and many activities like they show work together with China, make America great again.
That will lead to many other discussions. We are running out of time, but so far I want to thank the three of you gentlemen for being with us. We learned a lot. Robert Daly, always great pleasure to have you, sir, and Zhao Tong, Wang Yiwei here in Beijing. Really, thank you so much, the three of you, for being with us. Have a great weekend. You're watching World Insight with Tianwei, still to come on our program. Apple has unveiled the iPhone 10 that comes with facial recognition. But is turning your face into your password really a good idea? What kind of face are we talking about here? Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with Tianwei, coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Big annual event in the tech world as Apple unveiled its latest product. Its iPhone X is the most unique. Named iPhone X because it marks 10 years since the birth of the iPhone. Although it has many attributes, the ability to unlock the phone through Face ID makes it stand out from previous renditions. Unlike rival companies that experimented with facial recognition, Apple pushed through a neutral network that creates a map of the face and detects a match. Discussions about facial recognition iPhones have gone viral, mostly about whether it's worth the hype. Looking at their faces now, joining us for the discussion, we have two gentlemen. In Hamburg, we are joined by Jianwei Zhang, Director of the Institute of Multimodal Systems with the University of Hamburg. In Boston, US, we are joined by William Stefeda, who is the Program Director of Mobile Device Technology and Trends with International Data Cooperation. Jianwei and William, welcome to our show.
Yeah, hi.
I want to start by asking you whether you like that facial recognition feature of the new iPhone. Is it really groundbreaking or actually just one of those PR stunts? Willem.
Sure. It's something that actually has been in other phones. It's been in the Samsung devices. Certainly there's always room for improvement and additional technology being added, and I think that's what Apple does. It does something and looks around and to see what other people are doing or other competitors are doing and adds that technology and improves upon it.
What do you say, Jianwei, about iPhone 10?
Yes, it's very good to see that the RGBD camera with the deep information, this kind of sensors have been moved from labs, from robotics to the mobile phone applications. And now with the deep information based on structured light, and we can capture not only the RGB information, but also the deep information. And based on this precise sensors and for capturing the 3D information, I think that face recognition will have a better precision and also have a lot of new applications.
But is this going to be the future trend for phones, mobile phones, I mean smartphones, as Apple has always been the trendsetter? But we have also seen Apple has been evolving over the years since Steve Jobs passed away. Do you think it is still really leading all the others to find a new direction, Jianwei?
I think at least it's a kind of new technology used. How useful it is, we can argue. But based on this kind of very small miniaturized 3D sensors, I think there will be a lot of possibilities to open some more interaction possibilities, more applications like we have for the location-based services. We can use this multi-sensory data for providing more interesting future functions for the smartphone.
But certainly it is not just a celebration of technology. There are also a lot of concerns. Should people be concerned that they are giving too much personal information, for example, through facial recognition feature to Apple? One tweet from Matt Pierce wrote, 2018, new iPhone recognize your face, has arms and legs, allowing it to be more easily hunt and capture you. Another tweet said, Apple, should we increase the iPhone's battery life? No, let's develop technology so you can unlock your phone with your face. Of course, there are a lot of criticism. There are also a lot of cheerleading as well. Mixed the picture. William, but I think the most important thing is, what is going to be the function of our smartphones in the future? That, in a way, really answered the big question of what features should be in there and what should not. Another question is, what is going to be our relationship, the user, the consumers, with the company that produced that product? What about all of these ethical, legal issues which the framework still has not helped us to set up? William.
Sure. So the future of the smartphone and what it means to us is it's going to be the remote control of our lives, like it or not. And the OEMs or manufacturers are on the lookout for things that make sense to the end user. One of the things, obviously, that drives things like facial recognition is the difficulty of securing these devices. Most people, it's the last thing they want to do is enter in a PIN code. At the end of the day, I think we're going to have to take a look back, just like we did when Google's methodology and collecting of information was revealed. A lot of people didn't realize at the time their personal details away. I think that's a discussion that we are going to have and going to have very soon.
But Jian
so,
Wei,
I think in
I got your point, William. But Jian Wei, you know, we've been talking about this, the ethical issues, the legal issues, but the power seems is not in the consumer's hands when it comes to these issues. So in the future, are we still going to see what it is like today? Or actually there will be different ways for the consumer to speak up to protect their rights whenever or whatever the new technologies are being used? Jian Wei, as a scientist, what would you say?
Yes, it's a very critical questions. Now, if we have all the 3D data of our body, our face available, and you can do a lot of things, you can also misuse the data. But I think there can be some good regulations, and if some appointments with both the users, producers, and the governments can be set, and I think this kind of data can be used for also useful things and for provide more functions for the better quality of life.
But you know, Jian Wei, I have to interrupt you here. I really have to interrupt you here. You say perhaps there should be, there could be, but it never happened. At this point, we only see, for example, in Europe, some governments is trying to send so-called ambassadors to the high-tech companies and negotiate with the high-tech companies saying there are certain things you shouldn't reveal about your consumers. Besides that, we didn't see much happening. Obviously, the legal system cannot catch up with the development of new technologies. And also in the legal system, there have not been that many talented people who know exactly what's happening in the tech world to work on these legal frameworks and protect the rights of the consumer. So we cannot say we should or there will be perhaps. It is not happening, Jian Wei.
Yeah. So you are fully right with that, and now we are in an era of very fast technology progress, and the ethic issues now is becoming very urgent. So like how to use artificial intelligence, how to use this new face information, the security, correctly. So like self-driving cars and also this face recognition, and I think it's really an urgent time that all the parties come together, try to develop some strategies and cooperation standard for these security issues. I urgently call for this action.
Before that happens, William, do you think consumers will really follow whatever the high-tech companies will set for them in their products?
I'm afraid I think that's the case. They will look for ways to maybe shut certain things off, but at the end of the day, I think they'll be tempted to try it. And I think at the end of once again, we need to have that discussion and have a real sense of what some of these technologies mean for the future of privacy.
And at this point, also, there's an issue of price. I'm not specifically just talking about one brand, but who is there to set the price of a new technology, a new function being used in, let's just say, a smartphone or other products? Or companies can just set whatever price they feel happy about and put it through to the market, and the consumers just gonna rush and buy it like they're really getting the lucky draw. William, what is your sense of it?
Well, I think the companies themselves are in a great position to set the price. You got to remember, too, some of these devices aren't built or supplied by one supplier. It's a bunch of different component folks that ship, for instance, the special glass that is used, in some cases the processor or the RF function. There's a lot of different piece parts that go into it. Plus, within all those different sort of component systems, there are licensing fees to be paid to patent holders. It is somewhat, I think what's the best advice I can give is to have people look at their individual needs in terms of what they are looking for in a communications device. Maybe some people don't necessarily need all the bells and whistles. Maybe some people do. So it's going to be, to whoever needs what, and they're going to have to make the decision. I don't know if a $1,000 phone is the right for everybody.
Well, maybe right for Jian Wei, is it?
I think this kind of mobile phones is becoming more and more multifunctional. It's far away from just communication devices. And if such devices provide really the values for the money, and it's worth also of a high price. And usually a company, if they have a unique feature which is not developed by the others, and they can set the price by themselves, so to cover the whole research expenses.
We are not here just to talk about the iPhone 10. We are here to talk about one that helps us to understand where the future is going to be, and helps us to understand where the direction of innovation is going to be when it comes to smartphones and other devices people use. Jian Wei, as a scientist, what is your sense? Is this the right way?
Yes, I think three aspects I want to mention. So first one is such as smart devices are becoming more and more multi-sensory. And so at the beginning, we have this several very simple sensors for the location. And now we have the usual normal cameras, always better cameras. Now we have these 3D cameras. And also, at the same time, we have a better software for artificial intelligence. Now we have this neural network-based recognition software. And so these functions can be more based on these new sensory systems. And second is the development of artificial intelligence. And so now the recognition and later such things like Siri, so this dialogue systems and more awareness of the users. And this kind of artificial intelligence can create more possibilities for interaction, for VR, or even for customer to manufacture. And I think there will be a lot of function will be open.
William?
So also the third part is that
Go ahead.
is
Sorry.
the interaction. So the interaction now goes slowly from the keyboard touch screen now to multifunctional, like the natural interface through gestures, gaze, or even through the natural dialogue.
Thank you for helping us to understand all these future trends. William, what is your analysis of where the future is likely
Sure.
to be? Very briefly, sir.
Well, sure, it is the fact that these are our devices. We always carry them with them, and therefore they present a platform for various tasks and features. I think that the ability to identify and personalize things like advertisements or food orders. For instance, you walk into a restaurant and you put your cell phone on the table. The restaurateur brings you whatever you have ordered very quickly. It knows what you want in terms of what particular beverage. So those are the things that I think are going to be interesting.
Going to be interesting, but I have to admit, I'm more predictable than what the phone would tell me when it comes to diet. But thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us and helping us understand all of these interesting issues. Jiang Wei Zhang, William Stofega, thank you, and have a great weekend. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight CGTN, in your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Have a great weekend.